Very nice.
Yeah, indeed. You're listening to Gnarly Metal After Hours. I'm Kelly Thomas, and my friend Mark Roman in the studios with me today. Mark and I are friends from having worked together in the past on radio station KVRH, and you are also a very talented musician. So there's a couple of things I wanted to talk with you about today, Mark. And first of all,
I wanted to tell you the story behind that song.
I was going to say, yeah.
I know you don't typically want to start a show out on such a mellow note.
That's okay.
That's the way it worked out, but it was a few years after this song came out. I think that came out mid-'80s, something like that. But it was several years after the song came out. I had a crush on this girl that you would not believe.
I wouldn't quit.
Yeah. And for some reason, this song spoke to me because I was scared shitless to say anything.
Oh, of course.
Or do anything.
That happens.
And we lost touch. We are still very good friends.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm talking to her right now.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, if people could see, my face is all red right now. Thank you for your kind words.
I wasn't going to, and I had to throw it in there.
Oh, of course. No. Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Mark Roman, I want to take us back to the time that you and I were working at KVRH. And before we got on the air today, you were telling me a story about a troop of Boy Scouts that came into the station when you were on the air. Talk to me a little bit about what that experience is, because I think our listening audience will find it very humorous.
Well, it is. I should preface this by saying, even by those standards, 25 whatever years ago it was, KVRH was, I don't want to say behind the times, but it was a small community and not the most technological, but we made it work as well as anybody made anything work. But this troop of Cub Scouts came in just to get I mean, that's what Cub Scouts do. They go around and they bother people at work.
And they learn.
And they they came into the studio. Along one wall, there was a wall with little cubbies, and we had LPs on the bottom and 45s along the top. And one of these little guys pulled out a 45. And I'm not even so sure a lot of people that are listening right now are familiar with what a 45 is. But it was just a record with a big hole in the middle of it that had one song on each side. He pulled one out and he looks at me and he says, "What is this?"
What is this? And for the benefit of our listeners, we actually have a collection of 45 records here in our Gnarly studios that occasionally we will play on the turntables. So yeah, but for somebody at a very young age who is accustomed to seeing CDs, I mean.
Yeah, and it just floored me. I'm like, I grew up with them, you grew up with, doesn't everybody know what that is?
Yeah, and I think it speaks a lot to the development of radio over the years. I mean, radio has been with us since, the early 30s, even the 40s, and it's a fabulous medium, and of course, it's one that I'm very passionate about, and I know a lot of other people are. I mean, that's in large part why I'm here. I just feel this sense of love for this medium. But one of the things that's happened over the course of time in terms of radio is that more competition has entered into the marketplace. My daughter doesn't like listening to radio because she doesn't like hearing the commercials. Yet when you and I were growing up, we were raised on radio. That was pretty much the only opportunity you had to listen to new music was to listen to the radio. It's a habit for us. Her generation, it's a habit to go to Spotify and listen to the songs you want to on Spotify, which to me is very different. It has a less, a less intimate feel to it.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. When it comes to terms of radio, I wish there was more live radio.
Yes.
For sure.
Right. And that's why I was so excited to call you and bring you here, Mark, because one of the benefits of being here at gnarly101.com is that all of our shows are live. And this is rare because people can even listen to internet radio and they can listen to other stations that might have people voice tracking. But to have the live conversation, again, I just feel like it has a more intimate sound to it. You know, sometimes things go wrong. We'll make a mistake. We'll misspeak. But you know what? Shit happens and we move on. But that's part of the fun, in my opinion, of it. And I know people perhaps have a different viewpoint of it, but certainly when you and I were at KVRH, there was a lot of fun to be had, not only because it was a community radio station, it really focused on reaching the people of the community and giving them something that they didn't have, because at that particular point in time, it wasn't easy to access radio stations outside of the community that you were living in. You didn't have
we were
the
just
benefit.
in a bowl.
Yeah, exactly.
And if people are wondering, okay, what is this KVRH that you're talking about?
It's the heart of the Rockies, baby.
Go back to WKRP.
Oh, yes.
And the character Les Nessman.
I love this story.
I swear to God, somebody in the development stages of that TV program was in the upper Arkansas Valley skiing at Monarch or rafting or something, and they were listening to KVRH.
Yep. They heard our news director.
Yeah.
Les Nessman.
Les Messmer.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
God rest his soul.
And even now it's easy to get confused.
Les
the names are so
Messmer
similar.
And Les Nessman, I think, are one and the same. I think they got the idea for that character from our band in Buena Vista.
That's right. And to clarify, because I interrupted you, sorry about that, Mark, our news director in Buena Vista is a real person. His name is Les Messimer. The character on the TV show WKRP was Les Nessman. Now, the humor lies in the fact that the names are very similar, which Mark is suggesting might, in fact, not be a coincidence at all. And yeah, every day at noon and 5 o'clock, he would have the news for Chaffee County.
Northern Chaffee County. And
he was very good. He was very good at what he did.
And then, of course, for a lot of years prior to that, it was a little before my time, there was G.G. Mills.
Oh, yes. G.G. Again, another great guy, old radio guy, but...
Yeah, and it's...
he had an interesting...
not sure how to describe
Speak
Gigi.
for us. Speak for us. You do an imitation of him.
He sounded something like this. And Gandalf Therm says it's a whopping 32 degrees on the outside.
It was Gigi again was a great person, and he was so good at what he did, but it just fit the community to have somebody with that kind of a personality and that kind of speaking ability. It fit the station, it fit the community. And I feel like we're reminiscing here, but we're reminiscing about something that was very unique and is probably not as common today as it was back in the 90s.
Now, and as hokey as some people might have thought then and maybe still today, and as Garrison Keillor like as the whole setup was, you couldn't pull anything over on these people.
No, that's exactly right.
Which is one of the joys of live radio in a small community like that.
Yes.
Because you get done with your shift, you go to Safeway and somebody calls you out on something because he said it wrong.
That's exactly right. Well, and there's a lot of hijinks that go on in radio. And part of my idea for doing this show is, yes, to bring on radio announcers, to also invite musicians and fans to come on to the show. But from a radio perspective, people may or may not know, but there's a lot of hijinks that goes on behind the scenes. And Mark and I worked with our second news director. His name was Patrick Lee, and Patrick has unfortunately passed on. But Patrick was this old hippie, and he would tell stories about working at different radio stations around the country. And one of the things that Patrick did one time when I was on the air, and I tell this story because you strive for seriousness and you strive for credibility when you're on the air. And as you're doing things live, you have to be able to think on your feet. Well, I was giving the weather forecast one day, and Patrick happened to be in the studio, and he was working on some other things, and he just walked by, and in front of me at KVRH, there was a big window that looked into the room that housed this ancient equipment.
Three sides of the studio were all glass.
Exactly, right. And Patrick just happened to walk by as though he was looking for something in there, and he turned around and he stopped and he dropped his pants and he mooned me while I was on the air. And I remember trying my best not to laugh because, we're talking about something that's serious to people, which is the upcoming weather forecast. But anyway, stuff like that happens, and I don't know if that still exists in radio stations today. I think
it's human nature. It's got to. Of course, You don't find live radio as often as you used to, but
Right.
I'll tell you what, there's nothing more helpless
Right.
than being in a situation where you can't react.
No, that's exactly right. And again, thinking on your feet and being really quick. Well, after you were at KBRH, you moved to
KSBV.
That is a station that's still up and running for people who are in the Arkansas Valley. They can still listen to the River Rat.
93.7 FM.
Yeah. When I put together the promo for this, I put together a promotional video, and you can find it on my Facebook page or my Instagram page at Gnarly Metal. And it introduced Mark as a guest. And there's pictures on there from when you were with your crew at the River Rat.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
if I remember correctly, didn't you and Bonnie do a morning show together? Or am I thinking?
Yeah. I mean, now, David the Wild Man Long and I did like a first thing in the morning. He started things up in the mornings, and I'd come in, and before I went about my business, I would very often go in there and sit down, and he'd just look at me. One time, I walked in there, and I sat down and sitting there watching, listening, and he turns my microphone on, and he says, "What's up?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Dude, have you seen my kitty?" And he just started laughing, and from then on, it was almost every morning a visit from Budman.
Exactly. Yes. Well, characters were a huge thing. Was when I was at KKFM, one of the things that they had was a number of different recurring characters. Intern Andy was one of the characters, and the last major stunt we did with him at KKFM, Intern Andy was put in a barrel and rolled down a flight of stairs. Oh my gosh. There was Mr. Manley. Mr. Manley was the individual who was very inappropriate with the way he looked at the world and thought women should be, at home behind a hot stove and slaving
So he was
away.
like Archie Bunker.
Right, exactly. But yeah, the idea of having characters, I think, really lends itself. Some of what we see contemporarily is terrestrial radio or AM/FM radio having people talk about television shows. So as I told Mark earlier, on my show, Gnarly Metal, you're not going to hear me talking about Kim Kardashian's ass because I don't care. You're not going to hear me talking about who won The Bachelor because I don't care. So creating these characters to infuse entertainment into your show instead of relying on something that's established, I think is kind of maybe more of yesterday's radio, but I think there may still be an appreciation for it today. People, they want to know who else is listening and what kind of quirkiness does that individual have? How can I be entertained when you're getting up and getting ready to go out and leave the house, especially if you're heading out for a job that you don't like and you don't want to go to? You want to be entertained.
Yeah, and it's that impromptu sort of things, maybe even things that you wouldn't normally do or say, especially today in terrestrial radio, everything's so PC.
Yes.
But to just throw something out there, do your worst impression or say something off the wall, it's not only breaking up your routine, and not that radio necessarily ever gets monotonous.
Oh, I certainly think not.
But people enjoy that too. I mean, they'll just be doing whatever they're doing, and all of a sudden it's like, what the hell did you just say?
Exactly. And to have fun with it. And I think certainly we've had some lengthy conversations about the change in the radio industry. And one of the things that Mark and I were talking about before we went on air is the change that's coming with synthetic voices. And if you've listened to this show before, I had this conversation with PD Paul on one of the earlier shows, but we're reaching a point where synthetic voices are now a thing. So you have radio stations that they have the opportunity to choose who their announcer sounds like. And the announcer is not a human. It is an artificial intelligence trained voice that can be manipulated to sound like anything that you want he or she to sound like. And so it's curious to me as we move forward, how do listeners take to that? And if you're an old time person like me, an 80s child who grew up and was raised on radio, you can hear that there's kind of a difference to it, almost to a point that it sounds just a little bit too polished. And yet I feel like there's a generation who's been raised on that have that expectation that it's going to be polished.
Oh, yeah. I mean, somebody that's used to that sort of thing now if I played them one of my tapes, they'd say,
right.
why did you just stumble right there?
Oh, because
Right,
it's human nature.
Because I'm a human being.
Right.
Not,
Right. And that's how we speak. And my husband's always said he thought that one of the things that we should do when we're here at gnarly101.com and doing our live shows is remind people that our shows are organic. And I like saying that because they're live and because sometimes they're nearly perfect. Oftentimes they're nearly perfect, but we do the best we can. But that, I think, lends, more credibility. And then hopefully people have the experience that they're entering into, a relationship of sorts, or they're entering into it as a way of hanging out with friends or listening to a conversation instead of feeling like somebody's talking at you. Maybe it's more like someone's talking to you and you're included in the conversation.
I think organic's a good word. I think authentic is another good word.
Yeah, that's excellent. Let's go ahead and have some music real quickly. When we come back, I'm going to talk with Mark a little bit about his role as a musician. As I've said, he's a very talented guitarist. Had the opportunity to watch he and his band play in a number of different occasions. And truth be told, even though I might have been under the influence on one or more occasions, I still always appreciate I know. No. Still always appreciated when you guys would play. It was great to listen to you guys play. I guess I'm kind of enamored by people who are musicians. I started playing the flute when I was in 4th grade, and I played the flute through my sophomore year in college. And then I had to stop because I just didn't have time for it. But people who move into their adult years and make time to be musicians, I think that's incredible because it requires a certain amount of practice and a certain amount of commitment, which just seemed to leave me in my early 20s. And I'd never been able to get back on track with that. So we've got Cyndi Lauper coming up and Billy Joel. And you had asked me to play Billy Joel. And why don't you tell us real quickly why you wanted Billy Joel in the playlist?
Billy Joel, I just like Billy Joel. Just about everything he's ever done. He is such a talent, the likes of which that we probably aren't going to see again for a very, very long time, if ever. Just a good songwriter.
Yes.
But storyteller, very prolific. And when it comes to music, I don't think there's anything the guy can't do.
Yeah, his ability to write well lyrics, but also to create the music that accompanies the lyrics. And it's not just on a pop level. I mean, he does this with classical music as well. And it's pretty remarkable that somebody who started in the pop world has had to just move on and to do bigger things. And, he had that success, but his success has continued beyond the fact that he had a couple of really well-known albums in the 80s and in the 70s as well.
And there's probably a lot of stuff he's done that nobody is even aware of.
Exactly. Billy Joel for you, and you're listening to Gnarly Metal After Hours on gnarly101.com. You're listening to Gnarly Metal After Hours. I'm your host, L.A. Thomas, and my friend Mark Roman is with me in the studios today. Before the music break, we were talking a bit about our experience working at KVRH in Salida, this great radio station that the two of us had a chance to work at and very, very much enjoyed. Before we move on to our next topic of conversation, Mark, I want you to tell our listening audience the story you were telling me about the air conditioning unit, because I think there's a little element of humor in there.
Oh.
At least it was funny for us. But
I don't say you have to know the owner, Bill Murphy. God rest his soul.
Yeah, great guy.
Old-fashioned, and I sometimes think his retirement plan was to shove a piece of coal up his ass and wait till it turned into a diamond. He was a great guy, but he was very, let's say, frugal. And if any of you've ever been in or near or around a radio studio, they are just by nature warm places.
Yes, they are.
Or tend to get that way. Mm-hmm. What we had at KVRH was about this 5 million BTU 70s era window mount air conditioner that was mounted into the wall and exhausted into the newsroom. And you turn this thing on, and it sounded like the entire flippin' studio is going to lift off the ground.
Oh my God, it did.
It didn't. You could hear it on the air. There was no question about it. You usually want everything nice and soundproofed and quiet. And nope, that's what we had. And as long as it was working, it wasn't going to get replaced. And speaking of soundproofing, I think it was from 1968 or so. Shag carpeting was the soundproofing on the walls of this place.
Yes, the studio. And it was this hideous green color.
Yeah, there's some orange in there too. And then I shudder to think of how many pathogens and dust mites were embedded in that stuff.
Can't even imagine. Yeah. So just to give you all an opportunity to kind of take a trip down memory lane with us, because it was a fabulous experience for the both of us and for everybody else who's worked there over the years. It's a great station. KVRH is still on the air. What did you say they are now? The
Peak.
The Peak,
I think is KVRH FM. The AM side, I think, is Star Country, and they have an oldies FM station. I forget what frequency that's on, but called the Hippie, and they play all hippie music.
Right, and that's perfect. Keeping consistent with the classic rock that your station played for the River Rat, that kind of spoke to the culture, the people who lived there. There were definitely an abundance of hippies, and I counted myself as one of them.
Classic rock with a bite.
Yes,
the River Rat.
Exactly. Mark, you are a guitarist, and you were telling me on the break that you started playing the guitar at a very young age. How old were you?
I was 7 years old. I got my first guitar for my 7th birthday. I was given the choice by my mom and dad of either a guitar or piano lessons. In hindsight, piano lessons probably would have served me better because I would have had to learn to read music, which I can. But John Denver was the king of the world at that time, and by God, guitar it was.
Guitar it was, absolutely. And you were telling me also about your John Denver tribute show that you had done when you were younger. And one of the things that in our conversation about radio, as we know, has changed. But one of the things I think that was unique about radio in the past is its ability to build community. And I feel like your John Denver show allowed you to kind of reach people in a way that they normally maybe would have found themselves isolated from.
Yeah, because John Denver was such an important, I guess, musical part, if nothing else, of my formative years. After he passed away, I was devastated.
Yeah.
Several years later, I thought, I'm going to do a tribute show every year on or about the date of his death, which I did. And there were several people, throughout the area that listened and would call in and share stories with me. And they had a network of people who we obviously weren't doing streaming yet or anything like that, but people they knew and the networks they were in, over the top John Denver fans. I was a big fan, but not to the degree that these folks were. I was doing this show, and whoever this person in the audience was letting their friends know, oh, hey, on Saturday between 1 and 5, call this number and share some story about John Denver. And I was getting calls from the East Coast.
That's fantastic.
And we were even streaming. People couldn't even hear me, and they didn't care about being on the radio. They just wanted to share their thoughts.
And that, to me, is the power of radio right there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it allows people to connect.
Like I said, they didn't care that they were on the radio. They didn't care if anybody could hear them, which, in Salida, we could hear him.
Yes.
But it was really cool.
Had you ever had a chance to see him in concert?
No.
Who was your first concert?
The Air Supply.
Oh, wow.
It was at State Fair in Pueblo.
There you go. Do you have a big collection of music by John Denver?
Yes and no. Somewhere in a storage shed or box someplace, I've got almost every album and a lot of stuff on cassette. I don't want to say I've gotten away from it. It means as much as it ever did. I've just moved on to other things. Ironically enough, I don't listen to much music anymore.
Wow, that's interesting, especially having come from a background where, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were with Perfect Stranger, you guys played on a very regular basis. You were like...
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And the band before that, Road Company, which is primarily country and 50s.
Oh, but that must have been fun.
With Perfect Stranger, we played more often, more weekends than not.
And when you were with Road Company, were you guitarist or did you play, you said you also play bass?
I didn't with that. Bass is something I just piddled around with more than anything. I think it's easier for me to pick up for some reason.
Sure.
But no, with Road Company, it was rhythm guitar and vocals, lead vocals. And then with Perfect Stranger, same thing, rhythm and vocals.
How does a band establish that? How do you determine who has lead guitar, who has rhythm guitar? Is it kind of just a matter of maybe you switch roles, or is it typically some person, has more strength in one area than the other?
Typically, the person that sucks at guitar the most is the rhythm.
Well, now I know.
Yeah. In these instances, that's kind of how it worked out. Lead guitar, it never came to me. I never picked it up. I suppose I could have.
Mm-hmm.
I just never. Maybe it's learning how to play John Denver stuff. I don't know.
Yep, it just came to you.
But some people, like you said, have their strong suits. Some guys are bass players, some are lead guitar players, and are very good at it. Very often, I think you'll find that bass players and lead guitar players are almost interchangeable.
Interesting.
Just because a lead guitar player can pick out those individual notes.
Right.
A bass player, it's the same thing, but it's narrowed down.
Yeah.
Not to say that playing bass is any easier.
Well, I feel like you, in the course of your life, have used your voice as a tool, from your work in radio to singing in a band. Did you have any formal training for the singing part of it, or was that something like playing the guitar that just kind of naturally came to you?
No vocal training at all. For whatever reason, not too long ago, I remembered early in grade school in music class, the music teacher used to have to tell me not to sing so loud.
Wow. Wow. Interesting.
So, yeah, I was just blessed in that way.
Yeah, you just belted it out from a young age.
Yeah, and guitar, I took maybe 6 months of lessons when I got my first guitar, but I'd never learned to read music. I just would listen to something and figure it out, and if I couldn't figure it out, it was on to something else.
Well, I have admiration for you in that respect, because my training in playing the flute, I learned to read music. And one of the things I've never been able to do is to just kind of, I don't know, go with the flow or the energy, or follow a song without music. If I don't have music, I don't have the ability to, I'm going to say ad lib.
Play by ear.
Exactly. I can't. I have to have something in front of me. So it's interesting where people have a passion for music, but they come at it from different angles, and they're able to kind of craft that aspect of music that just works really well for them and creates something that other people enjoy listening to.
Yeah, I could have been and could probably still be much better than I ever was or ever wanted to be, but I got as good as I wanted to be or needed to be, and I never applied myself to get any better.
Yeah. Do you have any desire to play today, or do you feel like that ship has sailed?
I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
That was a chapter. It was a blast. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
You guys were good. You were very good.
I just, I used to say, when I have to depend on music for the money, I'm going to quit.
Oh, yeah.
And it happened.
I get it.
It got to the point, I forget what the circumstances were. It doesn't really matter, but I was depending on every cent I could squeak out of a Friday, Saturday night gig. It turned into a pain in the ass. I didn't want to do it anymore.
It's interesting you say that. One of my previous guests, so last month, I had a rapper named Anti-Famous as my guest, and he was talking about that as well, saying the reason that he named himself Anti-Famous is because he wasn't in it for the fame. He was in it for the love and the passion of the music. And one of my other previous guests, a woman named DJ Lady V, she said the same thing. As being a DJ, what brought her into being a DJ is her love of music. And I would say the same thing for myself. I mean, being an announcer, I went into it with the idea that I wanted to get paid to be able to play music. And so I'm wondering if that maybe had an influence in you deciding to go into radio.
Not really.
No.
I can say that my grandpa, my dad's dad, was an announcer. They didn't have DJs then, but in the early days of radio. And so there was that. But there was just something about radio. I could remember sitting in a laundromat.
Completely agree.
Reading the newspaper as though I was reading it on the radio. I mean, changing the phrasing on the fly. And one day I saw an ad in the paper that said, wanted board announcer. I didn't even know what the hell a board announcer was.
But you showed up.
But I called the number and the rest is history.
That's right.
It spoke to me. I caught on. I loved it.
It's interesting you say that because I've talked with other radio announcers who have had similar experiences from a younger point in their life. And to me, this is going to sound a little geeky, but here it is. I would listen to the radio when I was younger, and I would make a list of each song that came on the radio, and I would track the pattern in which the songs were played. And that's how I kind of got my interest in it. It was like, well, this is really cool. I like this song. I like this song. And that just kind of led into me deciding that, that's something I wanted to do. But similar to you, my father also worked for a radio station when he was younger. Now, it was a high school radio station that used to broadcast the sporting events. And my dad's role wasn't on air. My dad's role was the mechanical stuff behind it. So he was running the board and things like that. And I didn't realize it even had an influence on me until I started working in radio. And I was at KVRH, and my parents came out to visit, and Bill was there. And I introduced Bill to my parents. I'm sorry. We're speaking of Bill Murphy, who was the owner of KVRH. And Bill was there, and I introduced my parents to him. And I had completely forgotten that my father had done radio in high school.
This story sounds vaguely familiar.
You were probably there, Mark. I mean, you were probably hanging out in the room talking with us. But yeah, my dad had said that, and he and Bill started talking about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I guess this explains a little bit of where it comes from. But, certainly there's a passion for it. But I think beyond there being a passion for it, sometimes there might be a little maybe genetic component that plays into it. Excellent. Well, Mark, we have wrapped up our time here today. It's gone by, I know, so incredibly fast. I would like to say thank you to you for spending a little bit of time with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
First time I've ever been interviewed.
Yep. And and when I interviewed Big Len, who does Gnarly Grooves from 3 to 5 every Sunday, he had said the same thing, much like you, somebody with past radio experience who has been on the opposite side of the microphone. And so I hear you, because I've never been interviewed either. I just have a desire to talk with people about some things that I love, which is radio and music. And specifically for me, it's rock and roll. But yeah, it's just been a pleasure to have you here today. I hope you'll consider coming back for another show sometime in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you again.
You are very welcome. You're listening to Gnarly Metal After Hours. This is a live monthly rock and talk show featuring conversations with radio announcers like Mark, musicians like Mark, and fans about radio rock and records from the 80s. I'll have a replay of this show posted to the YouTube channel. It's Gnarly Metal After Hours. I hope to have that up within a week or two. You can go to the same place and you can catch replays of previous shows. You can also go to Gnarly Metal, my Facebook and Instagram pages, and I will have lists of upcoming guests for this show. And then you can join my show, Gnarly Metal, every Friday night from 4 to 6 p.m., 2 hours of hard rock and heavy metal hits of the 80s. You can find it right here on gnarly101.com. I'm Kelly Thomas. Until next time, have a great weekend. Happy holidays to everybody. Peace, and keep it right here on gnarly101.com.